Did you get on Zoom? I'm sorry, on YouTube?
Yeah.
So we are now, I think we may be live streaming. We will see here in just a moment. And if anyone out there can see us already, just be patient. We're still scrambling. It says this meeting is being live streamed. And on youtube.com/@Rick Levine, it should take about a 15 or 20-second delay. And then it should come up on your cell phone that we're live streaming and you can select it. And you might want to check to see if my sound is coming through. It is? Okay. So, and if anyone is arrived yet online, be patient. We will get there shortly. Okay, and
You know.
all right, we will be starting here in just a few minutes. We're still dealing with some technical stuff.
Open special sandwich.
Two 214-011, 214-011. The extra steps we need to jump through. It's verifying it's me. Look, it's me. Okay. All right, I think we are live streaming. And today's going to be an interesting challenge. I say as I take a sip of my coffee, be patient. Okay, that wasn't a sip. That was a whole cup. Normally we have Nicholas, who runs the live stream portion and the chat. And today Craig is with us. Thank you very much, Craig. But we don't have a moderator in the room. So you guys are on your own, and I probably won't be able to hear or know what you're saying. So there we go. And it is Friday evening, August 4th, and it seems to be, well, let me just get this so that this is live and actually updating with the time. There we go. It appears to be 6:35 p.m. here in Seattle. All times that I give, of course, will be Pacific time. And Craig, is the camera on me? It looks really dark. Okay, better. All right, thank you. Nice to see you all. What? Turn up the mic. Maybe if I eat the mic. Is there, can we get a little more volume on the mic? Who is Mike anyhow? Why does he attend everything?
Why is he the?
Just a little more volume, a little more volume, little, I guess is that good? Is that better? Okay, thanks. Thanks. Thank you all for coming out on this lovely summer Seattle evening. I'd like to give a special welcome to a crew who has flown in from Las Vegas, not Las Vegas, from Salt Lake City.
Yeah, Salt Lake City.
Hey, it's two cities in the desert, you know. No, I don't mean that. And but thank you for coming and joining the party. Of course, this is open to anyone always. We have a pretty good crowd this evening, and it's nice to see you all. And I would like to think that it's because of me. However, I understand it's because things out there are so crazy and screwed up that everybody's just trying to figure out what the hell is really going on. And so I'm your rent-em-out for the evening, and will do my best to keep you, kind of in the swing of things as to what is happening. Before we jump into the material, I just would like to not only thank all of you for coming out here, but all of you in YouTube land who are watching this live. And of course, this will be available later on the channel. So anyone who happens by later and is watching this after the fact, greetings to you too. My special appreciation also to Makia and to the folks here at Soul Food for giving us this space to do this. And I don't know how long I've been doing this here. For about 7 or 8 years, I did it with my astrology buddy and partner, Jeff Jower. And Jeff, as many of you know, who knew Jeff, passed away about 7 years ago. Has it been that long? And I've been continuing to do it. And it started out with let's do something that's a community event. And somehow it just kind of kept going. The event is free. I do not get paid for this. However, you are welcome to give a donation at the cash register. It goes to the fund of just keeping people like me, some not like me, coming through here. It helps support Soul Food. They graciously give us the space without charging either me or you, but please feel free to do that. And of course, before I leave the topic, the other thing that you can do is you all have someone in your life that you need to buy a birthday present for, an anniversary present for, just a gift for your spouse who let you come out this evening and you feel guilty about leaving him or her at home. Instead of buying it at the big box store down the block around the corner, spend some money here. That also is a good way to support. They have some really lovely things that I like to call a way of expressing your spiritual materialism. That's it. Let's jump into the month. Okay, so here's what I have to say about where we are in the big scheme of things. Man, I don't think that anyone writing a crazy novel, even someone like Tom Robbins, could have ever written something as crazy as the way things seem to be unfolding in the world around us. And although I want to focus on the month, I want to just stand back a little bit. How is that? I'm going to say the same. No. I just want to take a little bit of a more global perspective, but we won't spend long here, just so that we can understand what an extraordinary time in history we are getting to witness. Because when we look at astrology for like the day or the month ahead, we normally focus in on particular planets making particular geometric relationships with other planets. This is square that or trine that, or when a planet changes signs. These are the things that we note. But like I like to teach my students, my real students, not you guys, no, kidding. I think it's important to understand that the planets aren't just big rocks in space. I mean, we in astrology, when we do a chart, we map. Where is the sun? Where is the moon? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all these different things, and they're all points. However, points are an illusion. Just like as we go into the subatomic realms and we look for an electron, we don't find them. We find waves of electron possibilities. Crazy, but that's the way it is. So I'd like to remind us that even though we focus on the planets as particles, I call them BFPs, big fucking particles. They are also waves. The moon, which, is just past full and we can actually see it in the night sky, we can see it as a particle. But when we're not looking at it, just like when we're not looking at a photon, which is a particle of light, we see it as a particle, but it travels like a wave, and the moon travels like a wave, 13 waves a year, 13 cycles a year. And Saturn is like 3 cycles a century, and Pluto is like 4 cycles a millennium. And so it's important when we're looking at why are these times so crazy and so intense, we can understand that there's a confluence of a number of things going on, because even though there was a full moon a couple of days ago, that's one event. There's all kinds of other waves and things rippling at the same time. So when we look at the big scheme of things in history, we take the rule of thumb that the slower moving the planet, the longer lasting the event, because the wave is a larger but slower moving wave. For example, we look at the every other century cycle of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. Uranus is the planet of electricity, sudden change, revolution, shock, awe, surprise, releasing tension. And that's an 84-year cycle. And then we look at Pluto, which is a 250-year cycle. None of us get to live through a whole Pluto cycle, although just like we have our Saturn return at age 29 and a half, or just like we have our solar return every year on our birthday, we never get individually to experience a Pluto return. We'd have to live 248 years. However, the United States right now is experiencing its first Pluto return. And as we know from any return, it's a time of death rebirth. Maybe in our solar return, we don't see it that way, but when we make a wish and blow out the candles, there's something about pulling that energy in and releasing it. And that's what happens at every new moon when the moon lines up with the sun. In the mid-1960s, Uranus lined up with Pluto. And that was when the shock and surprise and electric change brought up that stuff from Pluto. Pluto is Latin for Hades, which is Greek for hell. Okay. But whenever I say that, I always have to do what I call my brief Christian disclaimer. And it's really a Judeo-Christian disclaimer. And I'm not disclaiming that either of them exist or that there are wonderful and good things about people who follow those, religions or whatever. I'm just saying, yeah, it's like I'm hedging my bet. I don't want to be struck down while I'm on stage. No. However, what I am saying, though, is that our view of hell comes from a very narrow perspective of Western religion. Whereas if you go to the Asian religions or traditions in Buddhism, for example, what we call hell is one of many levels of things that don't exist on the surface, which is, we in the West, we bifurcate afterlife and we go, in that moment, it's either heaven or hell, eternity, done. But it turns out that Pluto is really the archetype of everything that happens when it's not happening here in awareness on the surface, in consciousness. Pluto is the unconscious realms. Pluto is death and rebirth. It's not death, it's death and rebirth. And that's not just physical, it's metaphysical death and birth. Every time someone says no to you, whether it's a cop giving you a ticket for speeding, your parents when you were a kid, or when you're a parent yelling at your kid, when you say no, there's a death and then a rebirth that occurs. It's an ongoing and regular part of life and death. And by the same token, Pluto represents that energy of the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Caterpillar dies, apparently, but it doesn't really. It just metamorphosizes into a higher state of being, into the butterfly. So in the mid-1960s, when Uranus and Pluto lined up, there was incredible social change all over the planet that just exploded into reality. Whether you were a teenager like I was, and or whether you were in France when there was revolution on the streets, or in Mexico City where there was revolution on the streets, or even in China when there was a different type of revolution, but there was a cultural revolution. And when we look at these alignments of these outer planets, we see historical events correspond to them. And this Uranus, sudden change, shock, awe, surprise, and Pluto, the underworld, coming out into the open. It was that same aspect, incidentally, that occurred, or the same two planets that were in aspect that occurred in the late 1700s around the time of the American and French revolutions. So that happened in the 60s. Now, astrologically, when two planets line up, that's a beginning of a cycle, like a new moon. When the faster moving planet makes a 90-degree angle with the slower moving planet, that's a square. With the moon to the sun, that's actually 1 week. That's our calendar. When people say, "Oh, you really believe in astrology?" And I go, "Of course, don't you use it all the time?" And they go, "No." I go, "So you don't use a calendar? How do you get by?" Because the calendar is astrological. A moon cycle is a month, roughly, but that's where it comes from. And 1/2 of a moon cycle is a fortnight, which we moderners don't use very much, but it was actually a very basic kind of timekeeping thing, because what we do in time is we divide cycles in half and in half again. That's where the action is. So 1/2 of a lunar cycle, 1/2 of a month is a fortnight. 1/2 of a fortnight is a week. And of course, the 7 days of the week are named after the 7 visible planets: Sunday, Moon Day, and then the rest are in Latin or Norse derivatives, where, it's Lunus, Moon Day, Marte, Mars Day, Veneday, Wednesday, Venus Day, Jupiter Day, which comes from the Norse or the Scandinavian gods, Thor instead of Jupiter, but in French and Spanish and whatever, it's Hueve or something, of that sort. As you can tell, I speak one language really well, and the others, well, all right. So where am I going with this? At the 90-degree angle, that's where the first explosive test is. That's at a new moon. 7 days after the new moon, we often run into the first decision that we need to make based upon the decisions that we made back at the new moon. And here's the deal. Uranus and Pluto lined up in the mid-60s, created the 60s. From 2012 to 2015, Uranus, the faster moving of the two, was 90 degrees to Pluto. And I'd say all hell broke loose, but actually it was the 60s broke loose again, because there was a revisitation of the use of personal drugs. I mean, marijuana became first medically and then recreationally legal all over the place, as it was in the 60s, even though it was not necessarily legal. In the mid-60s, the wave of feminism, Ms. Magazine and the Burn Your Bra and the whole, the birth control, the pill being available. This was all the part of that Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And at the square, all of a sudden, there was these issues again, except it was less feminism than it was gender fluidity and gay marriage legalized and so on and so on. And of course, where we are now, let's not go there right now. But same issues. There was revolution in the streets, Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street. Again, the same energy was around. There were environmental issues again. And so this was like that 2012 to 2015 is like a reinitiation into all those things that began back in the 60s. But that was just the warm up to where we are right now. because the other cycle, and astrology is always cycles within cycles within cycles. It's like standing in the ocean, which I did 2 weeks ago in the Atlantic Ocean, and standing in the ocean and feeling the tide coming up, you know, the pressure coming in this way. And yet every wave has this undertow that just, you know, there's always waves within waves. It's never just one wave. And another wave that astrologers have tracked throughout the centuries is a much faster wave than the once every other century of the Uranus-Pluto, which is a very long wave, low frequency. Another wave is the wave of Saturn taking 29 and a half, let's say 30 years to go around once. And again, back to Pluto, 250 years. And what that means is that when Saturn's gone around once in 30 years, Pluto's moved a little bit further along. So it takes Saturn 33 to 38 years to catch up to Pluto again, because Pluto is such an elliptical orbit that sometimes it moves really fast, which takes Saturn longer to catch up to it, sometimes slower. But this cycle happens 3 times every century. And I call this Saturn-Pluto cycle waltz time for civilization, because every century it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's a waltz. Or if you want to count the conjunctions and the oppositions, it goes 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. But when you look at the events, and I've tracked this all the way back to, you know, the crucifixion of Jesus, where you see the important things that happen culturally seem to cluster around the year before, the year of, or the year after a Saturn. Saturn is stability, structure, authority, boundaries. And when Saturn connects up with Pluto, which is death and change and regeneration, transformation, you see events like Muhammad marching into the city of Mecca and declaring it the state of Islam on a Saturn-Pluto event. In fact, the Arab invasion of Spain that year was a Saturn-Pluto, I say event, like a new moon or full moon, like a conjunction or opposition. And in fact, when the Catholic Spaniards kicked the Arabs out, 700 years later, it was the year of the Saturn-Pluto event. In more modern times, in 1914, within 3 or 4 days of the exact Saturn-Pluto alignment conjunction, Duke Ferdinand was assassinated. That started World War I. The last couple of Saturn-Pluto events were in 1947. They conjoined. The year before that, the UN was founded. A few days after the exact day when they joined, that was when the UK gave India their freedom, and the partition between the Muslims and Hindus were creating India and Pakistan. And of course, in the West, we learned how cool was that guy, you know, took down the British Empire without firing a shot. But somehow they forgot to tell us that about 500,000 people were killed in wars between the Muslims and the Hindus over the borders between Pakistan and India, Kashmir. But that was in 1947. And also Israel was founded, established within a year of that event. And then, of course, the flip side of that is that Palestine disappeared. So these are the kinds of things that happen. At their next conjunction was in 1982. And I don't want to go too far into this, but 1982 is interesting because it's the only time in the 20th century when a old world colonial power, England, was fighting against a colony. That was Argentina, the Falkland Islands War, which was a real war. Bombs were dropped, people were killed. But also that was the year where Israel invaded Lebanon. There's a whole thread to that whole, not only the Hindu-Muslim thing, but the Muslim, the Christian Muslim thing that goes all the way back to the First Crusades. I mean, these are all tied to these dates. Enough said on that. Except in 2001, in the fall of 2001, Saturn and Pluto were opposite each other. And of course, that was very close to the World Trade Tower event, which was a very seminal event in our lives. The most recent time that they aligned exactly was on January, I always remember, 12th. I want to say January 20th. January 12th, 2020. The same day that China announced the first mortality designated to be from a virus that was associated with the viral lab in Wuhan, China. On that day was the day that that was announced and became formal. And of course, we know what that turned into. It turned into, a year and a half or so of events that I like to say, even the people who know what happened then don't really, it's like, it's like an important event. So that is like a one every 33-year event, except that one happened with Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, and Saturn in Capricorn is in its home sign. And the last time that Saturn and Pluto aligned in Capricorn was within a couple of months of Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther basically nailing his theses on the wall of the church in Württemberg in Germany, beginning what we call the Protestant Reformation, which was the beginning of the destruction, what do I want to say? The depowering, the taking away the ultimate authority from Rome. And so that was the last time that this event happened. So that's the next thing that we're riding on. And on top of that, we're now coming into a point where at the beginning of this year, Pluto changed signs from Capricorn, where it had been for a couple of decades, into Aquarius, which in some ways is a harbinger of the future because Aquarius is the sign that has to do with the future. Now, as we look at that and we look at these outer planet changes, we realize that we're surfing, whether we realize it or not, on this wave of powerful change or changes that go beyond whatever it is that appears to be happening this month. And what's happening this month in many ways is a bit of a turning point, because the first part of this year in some ways started off very slowly. Mars was retrograde, Mercury was retrograde. When planets are retrograde, they're not really going backwards. They look like they're going backwards, but sometimes things do not appear to be moving forward on the surface. The planets are not breaking into new ground. And the beginning of this year had a little bit of that, but then things began to change. And by March, when Saturn moved into a new sign, into Pisces, and Pluto moved into Aquarius, it was like the energy began really picking up. And where we are right now, we've just come off of a very intense period of time over the past 2 to 3 weeks when the nodes of the moon, okay, for those of you who know all this stuff, bear with me, I'll do this very quickly. But when you throw 2 rocks in a pond and the ripples go out, where they cross, they make a place that doesn't move. Scientists call those point nodes. Like a Cancer node is where node is Latin for knot. And when the moon goes around the Earth in its wave, and the Earth is going around the sun in its wave, where those 2 orbits cross, those are knots or nodes. They're called the lunar nodes or the nodes of the moon. And the nodes of the moon is about an 18-year cycle. It's what determines eclipses, and it's very important, even though there's nothing there to see, it's a very important point. And the nodes actually spend about a year and a half in each sign. And the nodes just last month in July slipped from, and the nodes moved backwards to what the clockwise motion of all the other planets are. And the nodes for the last year and a half have been in Taurus, Scorpio, and they backed up into Aries, Libra. And on the days when they were shifting signs and backing up, Pluto, which had just backed up from Aquarius back into Capricorn, was 90 degrees to the nodes, while the sun on the other side of it was exactly opposite Pluto. And kapow, we have maximum stress. And this was exact about a week and a half, now almost 2 weeks ago now. But it was like the stress was palpable. Everyone I know was like, it was like mosquitoes before a storm, like something was going on. So I'm here to say right now that whatever it is that's gone on is gone on. That doesn't mean there won't be new things. It doesn't mean that there won't be new ripples. But we're at a point where, in some ways, we're stepping away from the past, including quarantine, COVID, even, I don't know how to say this without politicizing, even the political scene in the United States. In some ways, enough has gone on with that we're moving in a slightly different direction. The thing is, though, with those things and other things, even though they're in the past, the big stuff has occurred. We still don't know what direction we're going in yet. I called this month on my YouTube, and I did a talk on Astrology Hub yesterday on the month ahead, and I've called August Betwixt and Between, because we're neither in the past anymore, nor are we quite yet in the future. And so we're in this never, never land in between, and yet we can't undo what's been done. And we can't push the river to get it to go to resolution any faster than it's going. So are you with me here so far? Is this like probably not what you expected? Let's look at some charts and see what the hell's going on. For some reason, my mouse isn't working. That's one of the things that's going on. And want to start off actually here by backing this up to, we're looking at a chart here that's going to be for noon, and I'm going to run this backwards and forwards roughly a day at a time, so that here we're now looking at a chart for August 1st. And for those of you who are not well versed in astrology, don't worry about all the jargon. Just, you'll be able to get message out of what I say, and don't be like freaked out if you don't understand something. On the other hand, I'm going to try to ground what I say for those of you who are, I see a lot of astrology students that I know and or practitioners. But I just want to very briefly say that what we're looking at here, this is a horoscope. The word horoscope is the same derivation as the word telescope or microscope. Greek scope means to have a perspective of or to see. A telescope, see far. A microscope, see little. Horoscope, see hour. That's H-O-U-R, not O-U-R. And so technically, what I wrote for 21 years, those daily things of what's going on today, we call those horoscopes. They're not. This is a horoscope. And technically, whatever it is on the eastern horizon is really the horoscope, because to the Greeks, the horoscope was the hour view. And the only thing that changes in astrology every hour is the horizon. And if you don't believe me, go out and watch the sun. Don't stare at it directly, or the moon, and you'll see how the Earth spinning makes everything around us go either toward the horizon or rise up from it. Now, the chart that I'm using here is called an Aries rising chart, because normally this is the horizon, but because when I teach online, there are people who are online here who are watching from Ireland and from Australia and from all over the world, and therefore our horizons are different. Sorry, flat earthers. Flat earth is not a theory. It's a badge of stupidity. Actually, that's not fair. It's not fair. It's actually a badge of ignorance, because you can be stupid. You can be ignorant and be really smart. It just means you don't know something. Let's not, another rabbit hole.
Back to the horizon.
All rabbit holes have horizons. All right. As all black holes do also. And you don't, if you want to get as close to that horizon, that event horizon, as you can, but once you go over it, goodbye. All right, so what we're looking at here is there's really no horizon in this chart. But wherever you are on Earth right now, if I go back to the clock version of this, wherever you are on Earth right now, the moon is at 29 degrees of Pisces in 16 minutes. There's 60 minutes in an hour, there's 60 minutes in a degree. So 29 degrees and 15 minutes of Pisces is like 29 and a quarter, just like it's like a quarter past the hour, quarter past the degree. And so the moon moves about 1 degree every 2 hours. So in about the next hour, let's see, within the next 1 degree, 2 hours, within the next hour and a half or so, the moon will move from Pisces into Aries. So by the time you all leave, you're going to be excited. But until then, you're going to probably be, what the hell is he talking about? I'm kidding. But that's what we're looking at. And we're looking at the relationship between these planets with each other. And these lines here are basically telling us the geometry of the relationships. And make no mistake about it. I mean, I went to college. I thought I was going to be a geometry teacher, and I got bored of that really quick and shifted to psychology, which is my undergraduate work. But here I am 50 years later, I'm a damn geometry teacher. The blue lines represent 1/3 of a circle. The red lines are 1/4 or 1/2 of a circle. And the thicker the line, the more exact it is. And I don't want to get too technical here, but I do want to just point out that the sun is in the sign of Leo, and Venus is also at the end of the sign of Leo at 25 and about a quarter degrees, 25 degrees, 18 minutes. But that RX means it's retrograde. And this is a basic theme to the entire month of August, because Venus turned retrograde the end of July. It remains retrograde all through the month of August, and it will turn direct in September. I'm going to come back to that and detail that a bit more in a minute and say what that means. But the other thing is that Mercury, which is in Virgo, and every planet has a sign that it's at home. You know, Mars is at home in Aries, and Venus is at home in Taurus, and Mercury, like many planets, is at home in Gemini and Virgo. So Mercury right now in Virgo is in its home sign, and when a planet is in its home sign, the Greek word for that is domicile. It's in its domicile. Let's think of the word domestic, at home. When a planet is at home, it's stronger. It expresses more easily and more natural. However, Mercury is slowing down, getting ready to turn retrograde. If you think of, let's say the sun is out there, and I'm looking at the sun. Am I on camera? All right. So the sun is out there, and I'm looking at Mercury going around the sun. I'm looking at Mercury. It looks like it's going back and forth. I mean, I'm not seeing this. I'm just seeing it's ahead of the sun. It's behind the sun. It's ahead of the sun, rises as a morning star. It's behind the sun. We see it as an evening star. Same with Venus. Venus is farther away from the sun, so it reflects more light. And so Venus, when it gets far from the sun, it looks like it changes direction, goes retrograde. But just like a pendulum, the pendulum needs to stop before it changes directions. And so Mercury changes directions toward the end of the month. Let me get out my cheat sheet with all my dates on it, because I never remember all the shit. So Mercury actually turns retrograde on the 23rd of August. And it stays retrograde for about 23 days. And it turns direct. Mercury turns direct on September 15th. However, when a planet goes, it's moving direct. Let's say I'm the sun. I'm not that hot, but let's say I'm the sun, and the planet's going across it this way, and then it turns retrograde. It covers that exact same territory again, and then it turns direct, and it covers that territory for the third and final time. That area of a retrograde planet going through direct, then retrograde, then direct, that area is called the shadow. Because if you have planets in your chart in that shadow area, or square it or opposed it or trine it, then you're going to get what's normally a once a year or once every several year, a few days or a day. You're going to get it over months again, and then again, and then again. And so it really has very powerful importance because of that. So here's the deal. Mercury, although it doesn't turn retrograde until the 23rd of August, on the 3rd of August, today is the 4th, that would be yesterday, Mercury entered that area that after it goes retrograde, it comes back to exactly, which means that we're already in that gray zone of things that happen under Mercury's watch, which is communication, interaction, movement, even physical travel. The word Mercury, mercurial, merchandising, merchant, mercantile, they're all back and forth exchanges. Things that happen now are not done, whether they're things we're watching on the news, big things perhaps, but because Mercury is going to be back where it was as all this went down earlier this week again, and then it's going to go through it again. So that's the Mercury thing. So we need to just keep in mind that even though it's maybe not going retrograde, even though it's not going retrograde until the 23rd, we're already driving under the influence of that Mercury in the shadow, that things that it's likely that if we can be aware that those decisions and conversations and things that are important to us, or if you're a writer or a manager, those things that you bring out into the open, you may be revisiting them again once Mercury turns retrograde. Once Mercury turns direct, you'll be revisiting them again and again all the way through the end of September, which is why we're not getting to where we think we want to be right away. That's Mercury. Now let's come back to Venus, which I said we would come back to in a moment. And by the way, astrologically, traditionally, Mercury retrograde, or let me say retrogrades in general, are a bummer. Retrograde planets are considered to be difficult, complicated, hard to manage, hard to live with. An astrologer sees a chart with a lot of retrogrades in it. If they've been classically trained, they go, oh, it's bullshit. Because a retrograde planet, a planet turns retrograde when it gets closer to Earth than it is at any other time in its cycle. In other words, if we go back to there's the sun out there and Mercury going around the sun, when Mercury comes between the sun and the Earth, the perspective is that on the Earth, we're moving this way. It makes it look like Mercury is going backwards. It's not really. So with Venus and Mercury, inner planets, when they come between the sun and the Earth, they look like they're going backwards. The outer planets, when they get closer to Earth, the Earth is in the middle between them and the sun. So if you have an outer planet, outer meaning further out than Earth, that would be Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and whatever else you might use. When you see those in a chart and they're close to an opposition to the sun, or at least within a third of a circle, then they are going to be retrograde. And we can check this out because here's the sun in Leo, and we look at the planets that are closer to the opposition. Pluto is retrograde, Saturn is retrograde, Neptune is retrograde, Chiron is retrograde, and Jupiter and Uranus both turn retrograde in the next month, in September, as the sun moves a little bit farther away from them. So the reason why this conceptually is so important is that you can think of planets as radio stations, and we're like transceivers. So, does consciousness exist in our brain? No. Can you open up a radio to find, your favorite rock and roll song or Mozart or whatever inside the radio? No, we're like radios. When you break the radio, the broadcast station isn't going off the air. And when we leave our body, broadcast station ain't going off the air. It's just the radio's gone. So more on that some other time. In fact, I have a lecture online on reincarnation. I think I call it consciousness con carne. Think of like chili con carne, because that's what we are, consciousness with meat. So the thing is that when a radio station is closer to us, it's easier to tune into. It's louder. And in fact, on an old AM radio, the close radio stations were so loud that sometimes you could almost tune them anywhere and it would still come in. They were problematic. The problem with a retrograde planet is not because it's weaker, it's because it's stronger. And what do we do when something is out of whack? Oh, we shove it away. We put it into denial. We consciously suppress it or unconsciously repress it. And that's where retrograde planets become problematic, not because they are a problem, but because we are a problem because we can't deal with the loud radio station. I mean, imagine if you were a woman growing up in Middle Ages in Italy, and you were just sharp as a tack. And your older brothers who were kind of stupid were learning how to read and write Greek and Latin, and they wouldn't let you because you were a woman. Some things haven't changed much, have they? Not quite that bad. But point is that if you had Mercury retrograde, you'd go crazy not being able to find a place to express it. And we all have different planets in our charts retrograde, and it's very difficult often because like where you have Mercury retrograde, it's kind of like where your parents told you to go to your room. You know, if you're going to be like that, go to your room and you learn, I can't be so emotional, or I can't be so interactive, or I can't be so clever because it takes the spotlight off my older brother who's the firstborn, or but whatever. And so the problem with retrogrades is not that they are problematic, it's that we can have a hard time knowing how to work with the overamping radio station. Now, that's one piece. The other thing is that they are looking like they're going backwards, so they're not making as much progress, which even adds to the frustration even more. So here's the thing, is that Venus entered Leo back beginning of June 5th. Normally, Venus spends about 3.5 weeks in a sign. But when it goes retrograde, as it did on June 19th, Venus doesn't leave Leo until October 8th. So that's a third of June, all of July, all of August, all of September. And so if you have planets in your natal chart in Leo, especially in the shadow area, which is, Venus got all the way up to 28.5 degrees of Leo on July 22nd. So if you have a planet in Leo that's less than 28.5 degrees, and then it retrogrades all the way back to 12 degrees of Leo, and it turns direct on September 3rd. But if you have a planet between that 12 degrees and 28 degrees, roughly, give or take a degree, of Leo, that Venus is going to go 1, 2, 3, and make an event feel like it's lasting for months, whereas normally it just goes whoosh, lasts for a day or two. Now, this can be awesome, and it can be problematic. It depends on how you work with Venus in your chart. It depends on a lot of individual things, but one thing is for sure, Venus is out of control louder than it normally is, as is Mercury coming into that. And to have Venus and Mercury both retrograde at the same period of time, while pretty much everything else is either retrograde or slowing down to retrograde, with one exception, and that's Mars. And so Mars right now for this month and even through September is kind of the troublemaker. Mars loves being a troublemaker because Mars is about conflict between establishing boundaries. Mars is the planet of war, it's assertion, it's aggression, it's direction, it's energetic, it's physical. And so Mars right now is a bit, I don't want to say out of control. Why? Because it's in Virgo, and Virgo doesn't do out of control. Or if it does it very carefully. I have a friend, actually a friend of a friend, who says that for Virgos, perfect is almost good enough. But it's not even so much that it seeks perfection. It seeks efficiency. It seeks effectiveness, because Virgo is an earth sign. So there's a practicality to Virgo, even though it has a mental kind of piece to it, because Mercury is about thinking. But the difference between, is there anyone here who is Gemini stuff in their chart, sun, moon, ascendant? Someone? Yeah, come on, don't be shy. All right. So Mercury also rules or is associated with Gemini. But in Gemini, Mercury doesn't give a crap whether something's useful or not. It just wants to know it. You know, it's the idea of Geminis being curious. Geminis are the information sluts of the zodiac. There's no judgment at all about whether this will be good, whether it's healthy, whether it's fun. I just want it. You know, give me more information, because the Gemini perspective is the more data I have, the better I am at making connections. And Gemini people in general can be incredibly clever and smart because they can connect almost anything with anything. Virgo, on the other hand, they are experts at discriminating what's not useful. And so Virgos are often incredibly, if I say the word narrow-minded, I don't mean that as a judgment. Think of a laser beam. You know, if I have a flood lamp and I'm just aiming it like that, pretty much wherever you are in the room, you can see that light. But if I have a laser and I'm aiming it at Craig can see it, and holy shit, it's really intense, but no one else can. Yeah, I just blinded poor Craig. Sorry about that, Craig. Add it to my bill. No, but the point is that Virgo is laser-like, which is why it has a reputation of being cold or cool or analytical, not because it's not hot. It's because it's hot. It is not aimed at you. Get over it. All right, so here we are back at the chart for August 1st. And we have Venus and the sun in bright light Leo. The sun until the 20th or until whatever, the 22nd, I think. The sun actually moves on the 23rd early in the day. It'll move out of Leo into Virgo. But while in Leo, that's the summer sun that's unyielding, it's bright. Leo energy, Leo people have intention that never stops. You know, you hear often about how Leos are dramatic or need attention. The sun shines, they want to be worshipped. Some of that can be true, but that's more of a male Leo. And remember, I like to always remind us and myself that astrology basically was written by guys for guys. So we don't get the lioness picture, which has nothing to do with being dramatic on stage and needing attention and wanting to, you know, fight the other guys to see who's going to be the alpha cat. Meanwhile, the lioness is raising the family, doing the hunting, taking out the trash, doing the bookkeeping, while the guys are drinking beer in the locker room, talking about, you know, their recent victories. Instead of thinking of Leo as dramatic, think of it as intention, because their focus, it's fixed fire. It's once the action has been created, once it's been created. Jung said that fire was intuitive. With most of us who know astrology, most astrologers, if you say, what's the most intuitive sign? They'll go, Pisces. No, Pisces can be very psychic and can be very sensitive. But intuition is based upon creating fully formed ideas without having any logic or any goal or any. It's just, it happens. Fire is intuitive, because a fire doesn't think, well, let's see, the wind is blowing that way and there's trees over here, so if I burn that way instead of this, it just burns. And fire in astrology just does it. Aries is cardinal, fire starting. Leo is fire holding that energy. That's intention. Sagittarius is fire aimed off at some distant goal. I'm going to get to that place. So we have the sun and powerful Venus retrograde in Leo. And we have Mercury and Mars in Virgo. Now I'm coming back to that Mars in Virgo because this is what it's very important. Mars stays in Virgo all the way through the end of the month. It moves into Libra on August 27th. So for most of August, Mars is moving ahead faster than all the other planets right now. It's moving faster than Mercury or Venus. Normally, Mercury and Venus move fast. It's moving fast, but it's doing it in a very precise and analytical and effective and useful way. So it's not like it's just going to go off starting impulsive wars like it might if it were still in Aries or even, or whatever. So there is a highly effective logical plan that we need to have. And as long as we move through August, keeping what I like to say is, one eye on the ground in front of the foot that's going down and the other eye off into the distant future, that is the most effective use of that Mars in Virgo, because we don't want to waste energy by impulsively starting battles that will eventually mean that we lose the war because we've wasted our energy on the battles. So that's part of this month. All right. Let me just see what the other things are that I want to talk about. Just some key periods of time as we get toward, the month started off with a bang, literally. Between the Trump indictment and some stuff going on in Africa, power struggles there, stuff in France. There's big things going on. And at the full moon that was on August 1st, this is close enough for let's make this be noon, go back to the noon chart. That's close to the full moon in Aquarius. On that day, on August 1st, we also had Mercury opposite Saturn. Mercury opposing Saturn is like a verbal reality check. It's like information happens and says, here's the wall, you're not going through it. And again, all I can think of is what went down in American politics, within a couple of days, right around this period of time. This was on Tuesday. There were other things going on at that full moon. I don't want to belabor the point, but Mars in Virgo, that thick blue line, was harmonizing 1/3 of a circle to Jupiter. And this is about positive expansion, confidence, optimism. And so even though there's some serious stuff, Saturn opposed by Mercury, there's also this sense of like, wow, we're really going to get somewhere. Something is happening. So that's how the month opens. And then there's a few days of relative quietness as we go through the second, third, and by the 5th and 6th, what happens is that the sun makes an exact square with Jupiter. You see those thick red lines there. And also Venus is making a square with Uranus. Jupiter and Uranus are in Taurus. Taurus is steady, it's determined, it's going to get to where it goes. Everyone knows a Taurus who, Jeff used to say, when the going gets tough, the Taurus goes to the TV couch with a sandwich. I always used to say Taurus energy is, if you take care of the senses, everything else will take care of itself. Is that true, Craig?
Absolutely.
Craig the Taurus?
Absolutely.
Craig the Taurus, his middle name is Thought and his last name is Taurus. Okay. But as we move closer to August 6th, we have Venus making a square with Uranus. And that Venus square to Uranus is important because, remember, Venus is retrograde, which means that back at the beginning of July, Venus squared Uranus. Now it's doing it again, and it'll do it again onward into September. Why is this important? Well, Venus is the planet of love, of desire, of attraction. Uranus is the planet, as I said earlier, of shock and surprise and new and different and revolution. When Venus squares Uranus, man, it's like we're thinking things that we don't normally think. We're attracted to things that we don't normally are attracted to. Doesn't mean that we'll act on them, but there's an excitement, a buzz when Venus squares Uranus. And for some people, this is when they come alive. And for other people, this is when they shut down completely because it scares the crap out of them. Again, we have to be careful about making judgments about whether any aspect acts one way or another for everyone. So by the time we reach the 6th, the sun is squaring Jupiter, which is about overinflated optimism, and retrograde Venus is backing into that square. Here we can see on the 6th that Venus is at 24.5 degrees of Leo, and Uranus is at 22. You can see the sun and Jupiter are at the same degree. The technical word for this is they are partile square, same degree. But Venus will take another couple of days. There's the 7th, the 8th, and there on the 9th, Venus is now partile square to Uranus. So we might have over this period of time from the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, a feeling of wanting to do things and make connections and kind of either maybe even break some rules or do things that are a little bit more edgy than we might otherwise. It might just simply doing something that we don't normally do or never thought we'd do, or being attracted to something that we used to just never even think about, and all of a sudden we become like really, really intrigued and wanting to connect in that direction. We also need to be careful about spending money. Why? Because Venus is anything of value, not just our feelings, our heart, but money. And therefore, when Uranus is squared by Venus, we can go to the store to buy a new toothbrush and end up buying a new vacuum cleaner, even if we didn't need it, just because it looked cool, new, and different, because that's what we're attracted to. All right. That brings us up through the 9th. Oh, and also on the 9th, we not only remember on the 6th, the sun squared Jupiter being inflationary and expansive and opportunistic and confident and big. But by the 9th, we have Mercury still inching forward a bit slower because it's going toward its retrograde. It comes into a trine with Jupiter. You can see that blue line there. And so we're likely to be able to sell anything. Even something we want to do. In other words, there's a sense of verbal confidence and ability to project something. And that may also be true of other people in their dance, in their relationship with us. But I think this is an important period of time during the month. Then the energy settles down a little bit. By the time we reach the 13th, a very important thing happens. Remember, here's Venus going backward, apparently, as the sun is moving forward. And as we reach August 13th, right now you can see that the difference between the two of them is about 6 degrees, 16 to 22. And if we move this a day at a time, you can see that they get closer and closer together, so that by August 13th, come on, there we go. They're both in the same degree. Now, when a planet gets close to the sun from Earth's point of view, not in distance, but just in its cycle, it gets swallowed up by the brightness of the sun. How many here have ever seen a new moon? Exactly, no one. We can't see a new moon because it's lined up with the sun. Okay, unless it's an eclipse, then you've seen a new moon, a solar eclipse. But as a planet gets closer, Venus through these last months has been incredibly bright in the evening sky, but it's gone now. Why? Because it's got closer and closer to the sun. It gets swallowed by the sun. Traditionally, the lore, L-O-R-E, is that when a planet gets closer to the sun, it loses its power because it gets overwhelmed by the sun. I'm not sure whether that's actually really true, but that is a teaching in astrology, not my observation. But even though a planet can get overwhelmed by the sun, when it lines up exactly with the sun for a while, for a short few hours or day, it becomes a Marvel comic character with superpowers. And that is, it's like imagine you're in the court of a king and you're just one of many 20, 30 people and you feel special, but at any time the king can turn against you and have you executed. However, now imagine that you're the son or daughter of the king sitting on the king's lap. When a planet is exactly lined up with the sun, it's like you're not separate from the sun. You have the power of that intensity, vitality, radiance behind you. And the Arab word for that, remember the Arabs through the 500 to 1100 AD period were really the keepers of intelligence and astrology, in the Western cultures. And the Arabic term for that is Kazimi, Cazimi, Kazimi. And Kazimi means to be in the heart of the sun. And so on August 13th, for a brief moment, Venus is Kazimi, in the heart of the sun. If you got something you want, something that you think is a viable value that you hold, someone that you're attracted to, this is a good time to make that focal or to create the intention or to state it. Even though Venus is retrograde and it may take a month and a half for it to come to fruition as Venus reaches its backward point, turns direct, and then moves on through the shadow for the third and final time. Incidentally, without going deeply here, but this could be a little 2 or 3 hour excursion of the mind. It takes Earth about 365.24 days, 365 and a quarter days to go around the sun once, right? I'm not saying anything we don't all know. All right, it takes Venus 224 and a half days to go around once. Does anyone here know what the Fibonacci number series is? Ever heard of that? A few people. Or the golden mean, the divine proportion, this magical number that the Egyptians built into the Great Pyramids, that the Greeks knew had to do with the aesthetics of perfection and beauty. Think Virgo here for a moment. Not with the beauty, but with the aesthetic perfection. It's the number that the great mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer Johannes Kepler said was one of 2 gems in geometry. The Pythagoras' law of the right triangle being one gem and the golden mean being the other. And he wrote that the golden mean, he called it the divine proportion, was the ratio that God used to create like from like. All right, deep rabbit hole, that's as far as we're going, except the golden mean, like which is often called phi, like the ratio between a circumference of the circle to the radius is called pi, and that's at 3.1417, it never ends. The same is true with phi, or the golden mean. It's 1.6180339 forever. Does anybody have a calculator handy on their phone? Someone? No. All right, divide. Shelley's in charge. Divide 365.24 by, that's Earth, 224.5. Close enough, 1.62. Venus is the harmonic hum to Earth that is the golden mean, the divine proportion, the mathematics of beauty, aesthetic perfection, love, light. That's why Venus is so magical. This is like, and very few astrologers have ever even thought about this. It's, yeah, yes, no, it's.
I just went.
Yeah. So this is why Venus is so important. And in fact, the only way, well, the way the Greeks would get to that number that you can't calculate exactly is using a compass and a straight edge. They would construct a 5-pointed star. Because in a 5-pointed star, the lines on the 5-pointed star crisscross each other to make a shorter segment, a middle segment, and then the other segment. And if you divide that line into a short and long length, it doesn't matter how big or small that 5-pointed star is. The short line, if that's 1 inch or 1 mile or 1 unit, the longer one is 1.6180339 ... Now, it turns out that retrograde Venus lines up with the Earth from the sun's point of view 5 times every 8 years. Can anybody tell us any of the Fibonacci numbers? 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1, you keep adding the one before it, is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 8. 5 and 8 are Fibonacci numbers. Venus makes 5 conjunctions with the Earth from the sun's point of view every 8 years. And it does it about 72 degrees apart from where it did it the last time, a quintile, which is 1/5 of a circle, meaning that over 8 years, Venus traces out in the sky with Earth, the points on a five-pointed star, sometimes referred to by astrologers as the Venus star. So Venus is totally magical, and we have that magical date here on the 13th. Enough on that?
Oh, that's.
Is that good? Okay. Not my stuff. It's out there. Remember, I'm just the rent-a-mouth. I'm just, the person who's been designated to be the, I'm not a psychic medium, although I might be psychic on occasion, but I'm the medium, meaning I'm in between you and it. That's what medium is, isn't it? It's like the halfway point between two things. All right. Once we move past the 13th, things really begin to cook up a bit. And I'm not going to spend time on each one of them. You can go to my YouTube channel, which is simply youtube.com/@Rick Levine. That's all it is. You'll get there. And my August forecast drills into this stuff way more, but I'm trying to keep this at a level where it's not so granular that we lose the big picture, which is what I'm trying to focus on. However, once we get through the Cazimi, the Venus Cazimi on the 13th, there's a lot of things that pick up. One of them is that Mars makes a trine with Uranus, and that's that. There we can see that here becoming exact on the 15th, 16th. We can see that Mars at 23 degrees of Virgo is now 1/3, that's an Earth sign, is 1/3 of a circle or cycle to Uranus at 23 degrees of Taurus, Taurus an Earth sign too. And you can see that even Pluto up here in the third Earth sign, Capricorn, is kind of making this grand triangle or equilateral triangle or grand Earth trine, which is really about grounding us practically. However, what's grounding us practically? It's Mars, the planet of conflict and energetic direction in careful Virgo, harmonizing with Uranus, the radical planet, the rebel who wants to just blow things up. And I don't mean that necessarily physically, although it can be, metaphysically blow things up just to break through resistance. Uranus's job is to basically to break through the walls of Saturn. Saturn creates the boundaries. Uranus says, no boundary. Saturn-Uranus conjuncted, the Berlin Wall disappeared overnight. So August 16th is an important date because we also have feeding into that on the technically on the day before, but we can also see not only is Mars at 23 of Virgo trining Uranus, but the sun is at 23 degrees of Leo squaring Uranus. And so Uranus here is getting a huge focus, both easy energy and conflictive energy. So I imagine around the 15th, 16th, we're going to see some stuff go down, whatever that means. And on the 16th at 2:30 in the morning, and I might as well just back this up to 2:30. I think that should do it. We can see here that the sun and the moon are within a couple of minutes. It was actually let's see, the exact new moon is at 2:38. So we actually could move this ahead just by a few minutes to make this exact. It'll keep me honest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now we have, you can see here that the sun and the moon are both at 23 degrees of Leo and 17 minutes. And that 23 degrees of Leo is square Uranus, while Mars is just coming into the trine to Uranus. And so this new moon, again, coming off that Venus Cazimi, it's a fantastic time to state intention. And when I say state intention, you need to be really careful here because, as my dear friend Caroline Casey says, the gods don't speak English. They don't even speak Spanish. They speak action. They speak ritual. I've heard enough newscasters over the past years say, don't listen to what the politicians say, watch what they do. And so from that standpoint, this new moon in Leo, which is a fire action-oriented sign, it's don't just talk your game, do something. You could pump the pump all day long and nothing will come out of it until you pour a little water in if it's dry, which primes it, and then the water comes out. So in whatever ritual you might individually do around the new moon, in the night of August 15th, or in the day of August 16th, that's Wednesday, or even the day after, because as the light of the moon begins to grow, that's when we are best able to catch the energy. And so this is a great time to do ritual, but to do something in your life that is creating a movement toward where you want to go, what you want to do, what you want to be. All right, that takes us up through the 16th. And then the next little run of energy is around the 22nd. Whoops, we're here now. Let's go back to noon. And hold on one second. It didn't like what I typed in. Noon. There we go. And now let's bring this forward to, let's see where we want to go. There's the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th. By the 22nd, now we have retrograde Venus backed all the way up to 15 degrees of Leo, and it's now squaring Jupiter. So again, this whole confidence, too much, bravado may be back on our plates then. We still have Mercury, which is slowing down, ready to turn retrograde tomorrow on the 23rd. I say tomorrow from the 22nd that we're looking at. And here we can see that practicality reigning behind. That's raining with a G, not like raining in Seattle. But it's basically saying that there's a fundamental background note here of practicality, while Mars is also opposite Neptune, kind of spacing us out a little bit, Neptune being the planet of dreams, illusion, fantasy, and so on. But we have Venus squaring Jupiter, again, stirring up that sense of confidence, overconfidence on the 22nd, and the Mars opposite Neptune. But look at the sun here don't look at it directly, put on sunglasses. Look at the sun here at 29.5 degrees, 29 degrees, 26 minutes of Leo. If we go here to the 23rd, that sun will have moved into Virgo. And this is the time of year when the sun is it's not as intense in the high sky, but man, it's more burnable, it's more focused, it's Virgoan, it's more laser-like at the end of summer than it is earlier in the summer. And that's the sun moving into Virgo. And this, for the last week of August, we have the sun and Mercury and Mars all in Virgo, and Mercury on this same day has stopped in its tracks. At least it looks like that. It's the pendulum reaching the highest point, not yet turned direction, and then going the other way. So this is an important day, an important period of time because of Mercury station, the sun going into Virgo, and the sun goes into Virgo just before Mercury stations. That's important because Virgo is Mercury's planet. So you got the sun kind of blasting that energy there. And also we have one other thing that happens on the same day, and that is that Mars is approaching, moving into a harmonious trine with Pluto, which brings up power that's stored in a secret bank account somewhere. So as we get closer toward the end of the month, this Pluto trine Mars that's not exact until the next day, the 24th, really brings up some important issues that are coming up from the deep. Pluto, we live in a plutocracy. Plutocracy is a government by the extremely wealthy. Why is the underworld wealthy? Well, in ancient times, you could have money, but you weren't really wealthy unless you had resources that were underground, like a diamond mine or a copper mine or a gold mine or a silver mine or a tin mine. These were all things that created immense wealth. And so a plutocracy is government by the immensely, intensely wealthy people. And so here, as we see Mars, the fiery, energetic warrior, smoothly working with Pluto. The question is, does this give us a way or an in to work against that? Or does this give that power structure a way to deepen their hold? Time will tell, but I think we'll see things as we approach the end of the month that bring some of that out. By the 27th, we see that the sun, which has moved into Virgo, is now exactly or partile opposition to Saturn. Remember Saturn, like the Pluto Saturn, Saturn is the authority. Saturn is the cop giving us the ticket. Saturn is reality saying no. Jeff, who I've shared this stage with for many, many years, used to say, Saturn is the planet that says no, but means yes. To which I always said, he doesn't mean on a date. Because when Saturn says no, what Saturn is really saying is you ain't ready to pass through this wall, this gate yet. You got to get your shit together better. And then I'll let you through. And that's good news, because if you go through too soon, it's not going to work. So Saturn is the authority, it's the taskmaster, it's the discipliner, if that's a word. What's the word for
Disciplinarian.
Thank you. Disciplinarian. I love you guys. Okay, it's the disciplinarian. It's the dominatrix holding the whip. You know, and all the other planets are sub to Saturn making the rules, and Pluto basically standing behind the scenes with the real power. So on August 26th, 27th is when it's exactly exact. This might actually be off a degree because it happens in the morning. But on the morning of Saturn, on the morning of Sunday, August 27th, we might feel as if we've run into a wall. In some ways, it's like the garden is in full fruition. That sounds great. But crap, if we don't pick the tomatoes today, they're going to rot. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to take the day off. And on top of that, the bugs are eating the zucchini. I mean, it's often more work than we want to do. But Saturn, the taskmaster, says you got stuff you got to do. Now, typically, Saturn is going to say, yes, if you've been putting in the work and dealing with it, you get a pass. But it's usually some of each. And so I imagine that we will see things unfold around this period of time that is that wall of reality. And let it be noted that on Monday, the 28th, is when the first official hearing is in the Trump indictment case. And so that is basically going to be unfolding while we have this deep trine still cooking from Mars, which has already by the 28th moved into Libra. We'll say more about that in a moment. But on top of that, we have that sun opposing Saturn. And so there's authority basically saying, this is the wall. Boom. We'll see how it unfolds. By the way, on the 27th, Mars also moved from, it's late in the day, so it won't show until the 28th here. Mars moved from Virgo, where it had been, into Libra. And Libra is the only sign in the zodiac that is not an inanimate glyph. You know, Aries is the ram, and Pisces is the fish, and Sagittarius is the archer. Well, Libra is the scales. It's not alive. And really, technically, Libra is less the scales than it is the fulcrum. It's the balance point. And so when Mars, fiery, conflictive Mars, the warrior, goes into Libra, it's far away from Aries, its home sign. It's the opposite sign. So it's technically, astrologers would say, it's in its exile or in its detriment. But that doesn't mean it's not powerful. It just means it's harder to figure out how to work with it. Because Mars in Libra, to me, is the concept of martial arts. Art is Libra. Why is that? Well, you know, art is graceful. Art is, it has movement. Think of a dancer. That's Venusian. And Mars in a Venus sign can't just go up and punch the bad guy. It has to in some way dance with him, the way a coyote might dance with its prey. It's not going to attack. But it's also the sign of the diplomat, who basically is working towards some negotiated settlement. And the diplomat may have a preference but he or she are taking the opposite perspectives and trying to find that middle ground. So we're going to end August with a shift of energy where Mars moves into Libra, where it'll be all through September. And I think that's important also. And then the last thing that happens of importance this month is the moon on August 30th. And this is exact at, where did it go? There it is, at 6:35 p.m. So let's just get that time in there. 6:35 p.m. We have the moon at 7 degrees and 25 minutes of Pisces opposite the sun at 7 degrees and 25 minutes of Pisces. And we started on August 1st with a full moon in Aquarius, and we ended with a blue moon, which is a second, not an astrological concept, but just a calendar artifact. The second full moon in a month is referred to as a blue moon. And this month has that. And again, astrologically, it's an irrelevant concept. But what's important here is that in August, it ends with another full moon. And this full moon is actually lined up with Saturn. It happens a few hours before the full moon. But in some ways, it's a continuation of that running into a wall, and something's got to stop, something's got to change before we go on. And I think that that's probably where we'll end and take a little break. Before we do, two quick announcements. One is we'll take about maybe a 10-minute break at most. And I will have slips of paper here on the table. If you've never had your chart done as a demonstration chart and you want to, I will draw 3 names out of a hat. It was hot. I didn't bring a hat. We'll find something. And you need to put in, if you want your name in the hat or whatever it may be, basket, you need to put in your name, your real name, your birth date, the city, state, and or city, country in which you were born, and the time of day. And you have to mark it AM or PM. If you don't have all that information, you're not going to be picked. Or if you're picked, it'll just go back into the pile. Also, put in your email address. I will not send you shit you don't want. Sometime when I do send you something, I'll give you an immediate option to get off a list if you don't want to be on it. But I don't send enough stuff rather than someone who sends too much stuff. And so, but you need to put your email on it in case something comes up and I need to contact you afterwards. So that's one thing. Number 2, if you want to drink, they will close when we're back, when we connect back up in about 10 minutes. So make sure that you get whatever your last drinks are, and don't forget to donate something at the cash register if you're so inclined. And go spend money, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. And also, even as we're breaking, are there any questions that you want to bring up from what it is that I said? Anything striking that this is your chance? All right, I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Nothing. See you in about 10 minutes. And I'm going to put the little slips of paper here, if you want your chart done, on this table right here. And for those of you online, I'm going to put my mic on mute. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. The camera will remain going. How are we doing, guys?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Also on this table right here, I have some business cards. Feel free to take one. And I also have cards for my upcoming 10-day retreat in Goa, India, December 6th to the 16th. Take one of those. And if you want more information on that, I'd be glad to share that with you later. All right. First of all, these guys. Oh, maybe you can take a few and pass them on back. Just take one off the top for yourself and pass the rest back. And here are some business cards. Oops, sorry about that. And here's some things on. Oh.
Yes. Long arms and those long legs. Noon. Wait a minute. Back up. I thought they don't like timer. If I go to my doctor and she starts to chat here, my back chart. They don't say it. Yes, that's what they but anyway, and then if you want to be chosen, that's what I did. Yeah, I was say, look, Lakshmi. That's funny. I bought my bottle tickets for the Fortuna. Yes. Oh, yeah. There. Okay. You don't want emotions to have your chart or to fill it out. A lot of times. When I went with my family, part of fortune is right on my left point of my chart. Yeah, I've done a lot of this. Well, no. Okay. Well, what it is that, yeah, but it's kind of, I use a rank astrology, which is like, and now Avalon is a super lucky. My Avalon super lucky is trying to learn. So I have some time, really lucky with them. So when anything is at 20 degrees Capricorn, it makes it a planetary. There's several different things in the chart. But maybe where I use 90-degree dial where Avalon and Volcanus are, they're real tight together for 2 degrees. So when a single midheaven direction or vertex hit that point, that's what I want. Well, the other one is Volcanus. It's not necessarily a lucky point, but for me, it worked with my chart because whenever I gamble, I write down or take a screenshot when I win big, like over 1,000 bucks or so. Oh, I find 10,000. Early in the spring, I won 10,000. I kept winning. I'm with my friends. I just kept winning. Yeah. But anyway, so I charted it and then I looked at it and I see it coming out of this. It doesn't always, trust me, I lost it. But when I'm on the plane and I can always see my dog, when I look at the chart at the time I won, like I said, I screen charts for the exact minute, I can look at my chart and see why it's, okay. Oh, yeah. And so, gambling focused sports. And so my mom said, well, and the thing about it is with me gambling, a lot of times when I win, oh, I'm gonna win more like this. So when I look at my friend, and she kind of goes, oh, now whatever. Now my what is just oh, so when you do win something or when you're fortunate, you're majorly good. So have you had good things happen in your life? Yes, I mean, when I have See, anything right on top of Pluto is big. It's nothing rebirth, but it's also a transformation.
I don't feel. And it's like dry, dry.
Oh, it does. Literally what?
And I have a weird thing, so like, like,
Jupiter and Neptune. So that would say, when that plane's activated by something else, you could psychically like walk through a casino and go, I felt that machine and it went. Because Neptune is psychic. It can be drugs. It can also be bad, but it can be psychic. So if you're focused on that when it's in Jupiter, it's really big. So if something's hitting that, like when the sun hits out of and the moon hits out, then you have a Jupiter, Neptune, and moon. If you were in a casino, you would know. I'm not trying to predict that. The good thing about ayahuasca, you're the third person that in the last couple of months that come into it. I've never
Here's her email.
Over there.
Oh, that's funny.
I don't know.
One of those red baskets right there. Is there one that's clean? Clean enough?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Friday the first. Oh, I'm doing a luncheon, but I can talk with you. I didn't read this.
Just, I think the Sagittarius rising mostly. But, you know, there's no accurate exact. The bigger question is, do you use the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, which is the Scorpio, like referred to as the Scorpio rising chart, is the Constitution chart. But, you know, I don't know. At the top.
Nice meeting you. Yeah, we had a great conversation. We had a great conversation with Deborah. That's his car.
Hello. All right, guys, we're going to come back together. And Craig, can you tell if the sound is coming through again? All right, testing 1, 2, 3. We're testing the online to see if YouTube is getting us. Dum, 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 dum. So there's like a 30-second delay. We're good? Perfect. All right, Craig says we're perfect. Okay. All right, now that we are back together. This is your captain speaking. You guys are awesome. I mean, it's been long and you're still here, and so am I. Okay. There's a story about the ancient Sufi wisdom master, crazy wisdom master, which is a tradition in Sufism, a guy named Nasruddin, who was on his mule one day through this unknown part of town in Afghanistan, in Kabul, I guess. And he's kind of plodding along, and he sees that there's like 4 or 5 guys on horses behind him, and it gives this feeling like they're following him. And he remembers this is like kind of the bad side of town. So he kind of speeds up a little bit and turns down a side street and gets distance and looks back, and sure enough, they're still following him. Now it's kind of beginning to freak out. So he picks up the pace, and he takes another side street, and then he looks back and they're still following him. He sees there's a graveyard up ahead, and he takes his mule to the edge of the graveyard and kind of runs off to the graveyard and finds a big gravestone and hides down behind it, thinking that, you know, that if they're after him, they won't find him. And about 2 or 3 minutes goes on, goes past, and all he hears this, and he looks up, and the 4 or 5 guys on horses are above him. And he looks up, and at that moment he realizes he kind of recognizes him, and he says to them, "So and so, you know, what are you doing here?" And they look down at him and they go, "What are you doing here? You know, you're the crazy famous Nasruddin. You know, we're following you. Why are you here?" And Nasruddin sheepishly looks up and goes, "Well, it's more complicated than you think. You see, you're here because of me, but I'm here because of you." So I'm here because. Got 3 names, and we will take them one at a time. And it looks like they all have a T and an I in their name. Ooh. I know who you are. All right, first one we have is Tina Chan. Yay! All right, so here's the deal. If I pick you as the victim, again, we're here because of you, but you're here because of us. And so the deal is that you may think this is for you, but really it's for everyone else. And so, and in order to play the game fully, it's like if I say something that makes like a whole lot of sense and you feel inclined, it would help all of us if you said, "Oh my God, that's when blah, 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 blah." If it makes no sense at all, that's cool too. It's like, no, I don't know. I don't get it. Just be real. And we'll see where each of these goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the data. And for the record, I do not know any of these people by name as they appear. It might be like, wait, I know we talked or whatever, but I don't know any of you. And have we ever met? I didn't think so. But then again, I met people 10 minutes ago that I won't remember meeting because I can remember shit that I read like 30, 40 years ago verbatim. Really, I have like a really good memory for that kind of words, but I have like no memory at all for people's names and faces. It's like, it's really, in my position, people go, oh, it's okay, you meet a lot. I know, it's really embarrassing, like almost always. So if I pretend that I don't know you, I'm not pretending. Okay, so this is going to be, I'm going to put the mic down. Well, actually, look at that. Wow, technology, cool. All right, so this is going to be Tina, and I'm going to put an SF on it for Soul Food, so that way I know where Tina appeared in my database from. And this is May 7th, 79, 5, 7, 79. Whoop, that went right back in the same place again. That wasn't right. Let's try this again. All right, I'd say Mercury is retrograde, but it ain't. All right, let's go this again. This time I'll pay attention. Tina at Soul Food, and that is 5, 7. Yep, right place, wrong number. 5, 7. We will get there. 79. It's giving me I'm giving me a hard time. Let's try this again and put a space there. Now, perfect. Time of day, 9:15 a.m. 9:15 a.m. and born in New York, New York, New York. And does that mean Manhattan?
Columbia.
Got it. New York, New York. I'm a Bronx boy by birth. I guess you would say I was born up north. Yeah, I got it. Okay. I just got back from a month up in the Northeast. And even though I was born in the Bronx, I grew up in Saratoga Springs. So I spent some time up in the Adirondacks and moved up that way and avoided the city, but I flew in and out of Newark. So probably more information than you needed to know, but I was stalling for time as I was getting these other things selected and picked here. And we now have Tina's chart. And Tina, in a few words, what's your relationship with astrology?
I just started studying in depth on back in March,
Okay.
but it's always been fascinating.
And where do you live these days?
It's up in
Oh.
5 minutes.
The land of Kirk. And do you know your chart a little bit?
I do.
And so this shows that you have 10 degrees of Cancer rising. Does that sound right? All right. So looking at Tina's chart, and again, if I was doing a real client, chances are I would look at that chart and spend a little more time in it. I'm looking at this for the very first time. And the question becomes, what jumps off at the page at me? And what I immediately see are this cluster of planets here, and that the sun is in the sign of Taurus near Chiron, which is astrologically known as the wounded healer, but it's really the wounded teacher. It's not just a healer. Chiron is a mythological character that was discovered thought to be a planet in 1977. And then it was like, nope, it's an asteroid. Nope, it's out too far. It's not an asteroid. You know, this is like, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. Well, no, it's not an asteroid, it's a comet. No, it's not a comet, it's something new. And Chiron is a planetoid that is in a class we call the Centaurs, because they're kind of halfway in between, most of them between the orbit of Uranus and Saturn. Again, probably more than you needed to know, except Chiron is important in your chart because it's fairly close to the sun. And then you have Mercury, Venus, and Mars all in Aries. So you're a Taurus, the bull. I remember a conversation with a former wife who said, you can't tell a client that's a woman, it's not Taurus, the bull, it's Taurus, the cow. And I said, well, yeah, actually I can, because I clarify what cow is. because it's not like the British, oh, you silly cow. The fact is that Taurus is a feminine sign. And what's feminine about a bull? Oh, nothing. And so in the United States or in the West, what do we do with cows? We, take their milk and we kill their young and we eat their old, that's it. But there are cultures that consider the cow the most sacred animal alive. And so from that standpoint, the Taurus, like the bovine energy, whether it's a cow or a water buffalo or an oxen, basically has tremendous power and strength that can be channeled. But on top of that, it gives of itself without depleting itself. And so you're a cow. Am I in trouble? Okay. However, although technically the bovine energy moves with great determination and relatively, you can't get a bovine to do something by just commanding it, like a dog. Come, sit, stay. If you wanted to get a cow, to go somewhere, you can't just put a leash on it and pull it. It's going to lock. It's not going to move, because Tauruses are like Newton's third law of motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. But if that Taurus is out mowing the lawn and you go, hey, it's time for lunch, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. Now I'll come in when I'm done. So there's this thing about inertia with Tauruses. But although you're a sun in Taurus and you have that whole practical sense in your world, because your moon is in Virgo, we talked about Virgo earlier, and Virgo is a practical earth sign. Taurus is an earth sign. So we can see that you got that earth stuff going. In fact, you also have Saturn and the North Node. That's one of the nodal points of the moon's orbit crossing the earth, all in Capricorn too. So you're an earthy kind of practical, grounded, down to earth person. However, you have 3 planets, the personal planets: Mercury, how I think, how you think; Venus, what I like, what you like; and Mars, how I go for what I want. How do I get there? You have all 3 of them clustered in Aries, which probably can be confusing sometimes to you, but often to others, because how can you be so simple, grounded, down to earth, and be so impulsive at the same time? Because there's a part of you that probably, unlike a typical Taurus, might Mercury talk before you think it through, or do Mars before you think it through, or Venus say what you like or love someone before you think it through. Is that? It's an interesting kind of dichotomy. And the other thing that makes it so intriguing to me is the fact that this guy down here, which is Pluto is 17 degrees of Libra, opposite Venus, which is 17 degrees of Aries. That's a partile opposition. That's like a tug of war between Venus and Aries, which in the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I have one of those, but I can't seem to, oh, there it is. I have one of those also. And traditionally, Venus likes being in Libra, which is one of its home signs, or in Taurus, that's its other home sign. So you are a Taurus, that Venus is going to be important, but she's a bit exiled in a way in Libra, in Aries, because Aries is a Mars sign. And so although Mars in Aries is at home, this is the part of you that at times can be more feisty, more young, energetic, outgoing than just the responsive Venus side, and yet that Venus in Aries, which is impulsive and spontaneous and more interested in moving into something new than it is in sustaining it, which Taurus is interested in. But its opposition to Pluto does something incredibly powerful, and that is it drags that otherwise casual, playful Venus in Aries that's not interested in anything but starting another fire into the hell realms, into the realms of power, passion, intensity, depth, and it in fact creates relationships that have a lot more intensity and even struggle and transformation than otherwise would be. I think an important story, if you don't know it, for you to learn a little bit about is the story of Persephone. Do you know that story? Do you know? So Persephone was, there are books written on this. I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version of the Cliff Notes. Persephone was the daughter of Ceres, who is the goddess of the grain. The word cereal comes from Ceres. So Ceres was an Olympian goddess. She was one of the crew. Her daughter Persephone was like a young Venus, but she was virginal. She was a Venus in training. She was training to be queen. She was a princess. She was the daughter of a goddess. And prior to her coming to age, a big black limo comes along with Mick Jagger or James Dean or some badass dude in it and basically takes her. It was Hades. Persephone is abducted by Hades, taken into the underworld where she was used and abused and raped, and made queen of the underworld. Definitely not something that would make mom happy, and maybe not something that on the surface would make Persephone happy, except she got the ultimate bad boy and she was queen of the underworld. Anyhow, the longer version of the story is that Ceres goes to Jupiter and says, get my daughter back. Pluto took her, Hades. She's in the underworld. And Jupiter says, I may be a god, but I can't cross the river Styx. If I go into the underworld, I lose my identity. But Mercury is just the messenger. He has no substance. He can come and go. He's a psychopomp, meaning that Mercury's resume back thousands of years ago, Mercury's resume was that he was the psychopomp. Mercury was the guide for souls crossing back and forth from this world into the hell realms. So Jupiter says, I'll send Mercury. And Mercury goes and works out a deal, and the deal is a little bit more complicated than I'm going to represent, but he works out a deal. So Persephone comes up and is hanging out with mom for 6 months a year, and then goes down and becomes the queen of the underworld again for 6 months a year. And that's why we have 6 months of year of fruit on the earth and 6 months of barrenness, because that's when Ceres is mourning, and that creates the seasons. That's the story. And of course, Mercury takes 90 days to go around the sun once, which is the length of the season. So, and the other important thing here is that Mercury, which is intellect and thinking, goes into the underworld to recover the abducted young Venus, who is the lover, but the pre-lover Venus. And in a way, this becomes the part of each and every one of us that has been abducted by some difficult experience and thrown into the underworld, our unconscious, where it has resonance in our daily life, but we don't know it until we send Mercury, talk therapy, into the underworld to bring up the unconscious stuff where we can work on it. It's very fascinating how all that goes together. And you, my dear, have that Venus opposed Pluto. And I'm wondering, without telling us any of the gory details, not for public consumption, does this make sense to you on some level?
Yeah, a lot. I feel that. My husband and I, we just feel a lot. I feel like we might be coming up from that.
Yeah,
I
okay.
had Pluto in my 7th house.
Yeah, Pluto moving through the sky was here when Tina was born, and it has been moving here through this area. Each of these sectors are what astrologers call houses. And this sector opposite the first house, which is I, me, mine, Aries, this is he, she, they, everything else, partnerships, relationships. So that would create deep transformation there. The other thing, though, that's important here is that Neptune, the planet of dream, spirituality, imagination, is harmoniously connected to all of that, taking some of the pressure off, which would suggest that it is either the creative process and or the spiritual pursuits that allow you to move that energy from whatever the early childhood experiences were that set up that heaviness around, Venus, or the expression or lack of expression there. And that becomes, I think, part of the saving grace. Oh, and then one other thing, and that is that Uranus is very close to opposition to the sun, which then suggests that even though you're a Taurus, you're a bit crazy for a Taurus. And I don't mean that in a clinical sense. I mean that in a friend sense, because if you're not a little crazy, you can't be a friend of mine. Okay, but it does mean that you find yourself in relationships, and I don't necessarily mean a spousal or romantic or intimate relationship, but it's the dance that you dance, the inner and the outer. Those relationships can have a Uranian flavor, which means that there's often things that happen that are like, just happen. You know, it was like crazy shit happens sometimes. And maybe that does for all of us, but you have that sign on your butt that says, kick me, that, you know, some friend put there to see how you'd react. And it's almost like as you go through life, you have to deal with things that are suddenly transforming or suddenly shocking or changing. And it may be that those things seem to happen to other people, not to you, but they impact you. But I would suggest that until, if you haven't already, own your own craziness and weirdness, it's going to continue to seem like it's happening to other people where you have to deal with it until you take ownership of your own, you know, rebelliousness and radicalness. And again, I don't know you. I have no idea how that's worked for you in the past or in the present.
Yeah, I think as far as friendship, I was like my friendship, they move away a lot. I'll make friends, suddenly they're moving away.
I would ask why. Or I would see what happens if you move away first. You know, there's something in there about who's in charge of sudden change. Something to think about. But I would say one other thing before we move on. And again, these are not meant to be in-depth readings. They're just meant to be connecting with someone based on their chart so you can see how some of the mechanics of this works. But the one thing that we didn't talk about was the actual horoscope, the view of the hour, which is the rising sign or ascendant. It's whatever is on the eastern horizon at the day and time that we are born. So if you were born at sunrise, then the sun would be right here on the eastern horizon. And one of the things that's confusing often for people who don't know what they're looking at in a chart is that in all of our earthly maps, this would be the West Coast, California, and this would be the East Coast, Washington, New York, and whatever. And when you're looking up, it's reversed. So the left is the East Coast in effect. And so the sun rises there. Every planet rises there. When you were born, the sun at 9 in the morning, the sun was already well above the horizon. But what was rising was the sign of Cancer. Cancer is the hard-shelled crab. The crab doesn't have a backbone. However, it does fine without one because it has an exo backbone, an exoskeleton. And so often we have the Cancer rising person who appears to be quieter than they really are. I imagine that when people meet you and they don't know you because they don't know that you're purposefully not letting them in until you feel safe. And then it's a very different story because once a Cancer person, a Cancerian feels safe, then you can't shut them up. There's no boundary because in the ocean, you see, Cancers live in the intertidal zone. It's the most radically changing weather on the planet because every day the tide comes in, the tide goes out, the tide comes in, the tide goes out every day. And so it's always changing. And Cancer is the sign of the moon. The moon is always changing. Oh, it was full a couple of days ago. Well, now it's not. It's always changing. The moon is our moods. Our moods are always changing. If you're in the same mood for a week or two, and let's say you're having breakfast and you look at your spouse, you know, over your iPad or morning paper or a cup of coffee and you go, oh my God, what did I do to myself? You know, and if by noon you feel better and everything's cool, that just means you were in a bad mood, But if you feel that way day in and day out, you're not in a bad mood. You're not in a bad moon. You're in a bad Mars or Saturn. You got to deal with it. It becomes more serious. So the Cancer rising is that part of us that changes on the inside, but we have that hard outer shell so that we master our own energies by keeping everyone the fuck out, except those that we let in. But because the tide is always changing, the Cancer energy feels like it's got to pay attention, hypersensitive, because if they're not prepared when the tide changes, then they're going to be either left high and dry and die, or they're going to be washed out to sea. So what they do is they find a hard shell of a larger creature who's no longer living there. Craig, are we okay? Or
Battery.
well, it's plugged in though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's 2 minutes. So.
No, hold on. Let's make sure that we are. Give me the electrical cord. Yeah, the other one. Everyone hang tight. Yeah, give me that. Well, then the battery, hold on 1 second, everyone.
That was the old one.
That plugs in.
That was the old one.
No.
You went to go get.
Oh,
Did you get the other one?
this is. Yeah, this is what I got at home. We'll get back to you in just a second. All right, hang tight, everyone. Wait, this is. Oh, okay, hold on. Try this one. Who needs a Mercury retrograde to mess up? Okay, thank you all. Electricity is not overrated. We need it. All right, where were we? Cancerian. So the crab finds a hard outer shell of another animal who's no longer living in it and crawls into that because it's afraid of being washed away by the tides. And then it drags that into a cave or wedges it under a rock. And for us humans, object, preposition, I got it. For us humans, what we do is our hard outer shell, our protection, our exoskeleton is our home. And our family becomes part of that environment that everything can change out there, but within that protection, that's why Cancer is related to the home and family. And so you're not necessarily that person, although the Taurus energy also likes the stability of having that, but the Cancer lives in fear of being washed away. It's why they're hypersensitive, which is why many people will misjudge a Cancer rising or a Cancer person because they're not seeing what's inside the shell. They're just getting here's all you get to know until I feel like I want to share the rest of the stuff with you. I call it the Harry Potter invisibility cloak. There's no one here, nothing to see. It's like, these are not the droids you're looking for. And that's it. Do you relate to that at all? And being a Cancer rising, as Tina is, that's probably all we're going to get from her, which is okay. I'm not trying to, yeah, okay. I think that's probably enough for here for now. Yeah, thank you. All right, now, next. That was, okay, that was Tina with a T and an I. Now we have Katie with a T and an I. Katie. Yeah, Katie, one of the Salt Lake City gals. Is that fair? Is that Salt Lake City adjacent? Former and okay, let's get your data in. And And also Katie is another person whom I do not know. Although I'm going to look at the chart with all of you in just a moment. And we'll go KATIESF for solar fire. Come on. And Katie is born oh, that's a 0. 7, 7, 10, 9, 73. Is that right? 7, 10, 73. And the time of day is 1:28 p.m. What the hell did I just do? I have no idea. 1:28 p.m. And you were born in Casper, Wyoming. I've been there. I think the least populated state in the union. Is that correct? It's the tree falling in the forest and not making a noise. It's actually the husband speaking aloud and his wife's not there. Does he really make any sound? All right, never mind. Yeah, is he still wrong? Thank you. That's it. All right. Another joke that I've absolutely trashed and ruined. What was the joke that I heard? Oh, so a priest and a minister and a rabbit walk into a bar. And the bartender says, "What is this, a typo?" Think about it. Okay. All right, so first thing we notice is how every chart looks completely different. Katie's chart looks a lot noisier because there aren't as many planets clustered together. And it's neither good news nor bad news. It's just a different energetic system. And now we can revisit those things that I said about a Cancer rising person, Tina, and note that Katie is born with the sun in Cancer and the moon in Scorpio, which immediately for me brings up the concept that both the sun and the moon in Katie's chart are in water signs, water astrologically being connected to emotions or feelings or kind of it's not the practical container, it's what's in the container that takes shape and form from the container itself. But I should say that because Katie was born near noon, and again, this is daylight time, so that the sun was actually very close to the top of the chart, even though it was 1:30, it would look like it's more like 12:30 because the sun is so close to this point being what we call the midheaven or the high noon point in the chart. But every sign is different for different people, and even for gender differentiation, that some people, for example, again, doesn't matter what sex organs you happen to have, that if you are stronger identified with the yin feminine energy, there are signs, every sign is masculine or feminine, and that's not meant as a sex type, it's meant as an energetic yin yang, kind of the yin, the yielding, the internal, the yang, the more forceful external expression. And with Cancer, because it is a water sign and it is self-protecting, it's a much easier sign for a woman to have typically than a man. And again, that certainly changed already, but is still changing culturally. But typically, if you go back 50 years or more, it was tough being a Cancerian male. It was much easier to be a Cancer moon male, because that way people didn't have to know how you felt. And by the same token, being a Cancerian woman is and has been traditionally, on some levels, easier, just because of cultural considerations. But we have that coupled with a Scorpio moon, which, although I do know people who really like their Scorpio moons, many astrologers would argue that it's one of the two most difficult moon signs, because although Scorpio is energetically yin and it's not yielding. It's fixed. It's a fixed sign like Taurus or Leo or Aquarius. And as such, the water, the emotions in Scorpio can be very intense, very powerful, and sometimes hard to manage, especially if it's a moon, because it's internal stuff that maybe other people don't necessarily see unless they are close or too close. But that's the first things that I noticed. Then I notice also that Mercury and Venus are both in Leo. And in fact, Mercury is retrograde in Leo and early enough that it doesn't get hit the 1, 2, 3 times by Venus, but Venus does. So you already had Venus return to where it was when you were born. And in fact, I'm going to just very quickly here bounce to another way of looking at this chart. Whoops. Cancel and dynamic and animate by wheel. So here we're looking at the same chart as your chart in the middle. There's no lines on it though. And we're looking at this outer chart is where the planets are now. And here's Venus retrograde at 25 degrees of Leo. And I'm going to back this up a day at a time until Venus gets back to, is this going into, yeah, there we go. So here we can see that on June 19th, Venus was lined up with where Venus was in your chart. And at that time, Venus was going forward. So here we backed up to the 16th. And we also have Mars in the same area. I would guess, without looking at the other stuff in your chart even yet, that, you know, the end of May and June, they were kind of energetically, there was stuff going on, whatever that means. Maybe not long-lasting stuff, but personal stuff on some level. And with Venus returning to where it was when you were born, Venus return, that occurred on June 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, right in there, 20th, 21st. I mean, right in that period of time. So my suggestion is that those things that happened then, and the more, while it's still fresh in your mind, you could spend time thinking about that, because then, and we're just watching Venus here as I move this a day at a time. We move this, I'm going to speed this up, that Venus then moves, it then turns retrograde right about there. Now I'm going to do it a day at a time again. And here's Venus now retrograding back toward that 12-degree point where it will reach right there as it's slowing down. Around the end of August, Venus will reach that point and it will turn direct right around the 1st of September, lined up with your Venus. So the end of August, beginning of September, for you, I think, is going to be an intensification of whatever it was on some level that you were dealing with back in June. Does that make sense to you at all? Too much sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But you see what I'm just looking at the planets here as rhythms. So I want to come back to the chart that we were looking at before. And that's one of the things that I noted. Now, the other thing that I note, which is really also very significant, is the fact that when Katie was born, the sun had already reached the highest point in the chart, but Libra was rising, except this is not a normal Libra rising chart. Do you know your chart, Sam? How long have you been studying astrology? Oh, okay. So you know that you are a Libra rising, but if we had really sharp eyes, and if the sun wasn't up, we could see that when Katie was born, the planet Uranus was just coming up over the eastern horizon. You have Uranus rising in Libra. Every day, every planet rises. When a planet is rising in a chart, there's a well-known astrologer who was once asked, if you only had 1 hour with a client, how long would you spend talking about the ascendant or the rising sign? And this very well-known astrologer who's been dead quite a while said, if I only had an hour, and how much of that time would I spend talking about the ascendant? All of it. because the ascendant is the horoscope. It is the hour marker. And it's in the West, we often think of it in the Jungian terms as our mask or our persona. It's how we appear to others. I used to say that it was the dance that we danced when we met someone new. So Tina would dance that dance by maybe holding on to some of the stuff that she just doesn't want everyone to know. And a Libra rising might dance with another person in a very graceful and acknowledging and acquiescent and nice manner, except there's Uranus there, which means that I think that there's a part of Katie that even though she's an invisible, emotionally invisible Cancerian, there's a part of her that really likes shooting bolts of lightning just to see how other people react. And I see the half a dozen people that came here with her are all laughing. What the jurors should know is the laugh of recognition. Do you want to say anything about that, Katie, as to how that works for you or what that is? Speak up so we can hear you. We know you're a Cancer, but we know you have that Uranus there. Give it to us.
So I'm a Cancer, but I am only a Cancer at work. That's right.
Got it.
So, yeah, like I very much.
And incidentally, the sun, any planet at the very high point of the chart is often not, it's like if you're at a school board meeting and someone stands up that you don't know, but everyone knows that's the guy down the block who has that dog that's always, we don't know anything about him, but we know something about his social role. Oh yeah, any planet that's very close to that midheaven point is not, it's about us personally, but it's how it's projected into the workplace, mission place, world place. And so that Katie said that she's like that Cancerian at work. I hear that, but I would imagine that also that there's a higher level of loyalty and or even self-protection around those you love and your family, parents, children, spouse, if any of those apply. I would imagine that Cancer energy does come out there, but there it comes out in a more expressive way because it's safe there on some level, which is why that Uranus comes out. But the Uranus rising, it's like I think ultimately there's a part of Katie that maybe it's that she's so good at reacting in the moment that when things are all screwed up and crazy, that kind of gives you the freedom. Maybe as a child, when no one was paying attention to you, you liked that because you got to be a little more free than when everyone was breathing down your, down your back or your neck, whatever that saying is. And so there's a part of you that as an adult has realized that if I say shit or do stuff that really makes people crazy, I can get away with more stuff than I would otherwise. Does that feel right? And on top of that, we also notice that Mars and Chiron, but Mars in particular, at 12 Aries is partile, same degree, trine to Venus in Leo, which means that that whole Venus return thing is not only re-empowering your own Venus, but your Venus is always being exacerbated, energized, stimulated by that part of you that would just like to punch that asshole, whoever that person is. And that doesn't mean you always do, or maybe more, it doesn't mean that they always know that you're the one who punched them, because the Scorpio has that ability to get away with things in a way that, and Cancer does too. Cancer, and I'm not saying this to be mean to anyone with Cancerian energy. I have a Cancer moon, but Cancer is probably the best manipulator in the zodiac. If you think that manipulation is simply taking responsibility for your actions without anyone knowing. And you combine that with a functional Mars in Aries, when Katie does something, she knows she's doing it, unless it's so impulsive, it just happens. I mean, my Mars in Aries line, and again, I feel like I'm identifying with everyone tonight. But I have a Mars in Aries also, along with Venus, along with Mercury, along with the Sun, a few other things, North Node. But Mars in Aries it's what I call the ready, fire, aim. You know, it's the do it first and then figure out what you're going to do. You know, and again, meanwhile, that's in direct conflict always with the part of you that says, I don't want to do anything until I have a plan and I feel safe and I know that what I do isn't going to offend my boss, which is probably why at work that Uranus is kind of, it's not that it's not there, it's just that you keep it in your pocket. I have this whole idea that we all always have all the planets in our pocket, and we become more effective as a human being when we learn which ones to keep in our pocket and which ones to take out at various situations. And I think probably as a youth, you had no idea that you were constantly taking that Uranus out of your pocket, and then you were doing shit that you were embarrassed about, or, you know, or whatever. But as an adult, on some level, even though you still think, this is what I want to do, or this is what this person needs, or whatever, you just may not act on it quite as much because the Cancer part of you has learned that if you do, then you have to pay the price of dealing with other people's reactions to that. I would imagine that that the quarantine period of time that I talked about with the Saturn-Pluto opposition, that occurred at about 20 degrees of Capricorn, which is down here exactly opposite your sun. So I would imagine that that January of 2020, even before quarantine happened, was already plenty intense enough for you. That was probably a very dynamic point in structural change in your life on some level. Yeah, it's just something that I think that I would note, because Saturn and Pluto at that time were not only opposite your sun, but they were also coming through that point of being, square to your Mars, square to your ascendant, square to Uranus. So I imagine that was a pretty dynamic point. The other thing I want to mention before we go on, and again, understand that I'm not talking about everything in each of these charts. I'm really just cherry picking some things that seem to stand out. And the other thing, though, that stands out is the relationship between this retrograde Mercury, which again is not, you know, they say don't sign contracts when Mercury is retrograde, don't buy a computer. Bullshit. Just think about what you're doing before you do it and read the fine print. I have a friend who was thinking about buying a car, and when Mercury turned retrograde, and actually went out looking on the first day for his car, and he came across this incredible Porsche that he fell in love with, and the guy at the dealership made this deal that he absolutely couldn't refuse. It was a purple Porsche, and he bought it like on the spot. And it was only when he got home and his wife confronted him saying, so what, is it either me or the dog? You know, he went, oh shit, I forgot. You know, we just do things often with Mercury retrograde without thinking it through, because it's so loud, it feels more urgent. And with that Mercury in Leo retrograde, there is a part of you that means or suggests to me that there's a lot more going on in a mental framework than people on the outside get to see. And yet it is also, or not yet, it is also harmonized with the moon and Neptune, even though they're in separate signs, the moon at the end of Scorpio and Neptune at the beginning of Sagittarius. In a way, it's that Neptune that is really close to that, which would suggest to me the importance of either your spirituality and that whole pursuit, whatever that means to you individually, or your fantasies, because Neptune is our dreams and our imagination, and connected up with Mercury like that, I think really strengthens it. And I think on one hand, that can be absolutely brilliant for the imagination, for creativity, for singing, for dancing, for those things that have to do with all that, or for any sort of spiritual pursuit. Do you relate to any of those things? that all we getting out of you?
Well, it's too much. Yeah.
All right, so we've just seen a Mercury retrograde in function because it's in a Cancer sun. It's like, yeah, there's more, but it's too much. And often that Cancer, the intensity of the internalized Cancer energy is often, we think of, again, it's the crab in the intertidal zone, which is the singular most nutrient-rich place on the planet. I mean, if one wants to be where the action is, that's where the action is. But that Cancer energy is also the crab trapped at the bottom of a well. And they can see the sunlight way, way up there. But there's no way for the crab to scale that wall. And it's like the coldness at the bottom of the ocean. And there's that feeling like, I can see it and I know how to get out of here, but I can't do it. It's too much. And often that converts into, I got all these thoughts going on in my head, but there's no place to jump in, because if I jump in there, that'll take me in this direction. And so there's that feeling of I stay quiet, or I stay in stagnation or lack of motion because I don't quite know where to make that first step. And this is crazy for you on some level because you're a Mars in Aries. There's nothing better than taking that first step and feeling the confidence of, and then there's nothing more fearful than what if I take that first step and everything fucks up forever. Does that make sense to you? All right. That's enough. Is that enough?
Yes.
All right. Wait, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
said it's like geometry and psychology all wrapped in one.
Hello. Yeah, it sure is. All right. One more, and then we're out of here. And thank you to the baristas. I know they all just love the first Friday night of every month because I get them overtime. All right, we have another TI person. How many TI persons are here? How many people have a TI in their name? First name. So would that be you, Christine? Well, geez, we missed one. We have a Christine. Oh my God, there we are.
I'm not part of this. So I say the time of year. She's an edgy.
Got it. Well, I'm not either. So we have something in common. We're both not. All right. So we have Christine, and we'll get that chart up and we'll do this.
We were both teenagers in sixth.
Got it. All right. Hold on a second. So we got here, we got Kristine, Christine SF, Soul Food. And we have a birth date of 10/20/54, 20, not 200, 54. And we have a 6:54 p.m., that was not a 6:54 p.m. And we have a Siwa, Seattle, Seattle, Washington. And Christine, what's your relationship with astrology? And do you know your chart a little bit, or?
I've studied it for years, but I go in and out.
Okay, and do you live in Seattle, or
I do, yeah. I moved away for 30 years. I was 30 years old.
where'd you go? Oh, welcome back.
Yeah.
All right, back to geometry. Everything in this chart is contained within a half of the chart. Can you see that? And there is a guy named Mark Edmund Jones who in the 50s and 60s wrote a bunch of books about chart patterns. And this is forget about what planet is in what sign, what aspects. This is considered to be a bowl where all the planets are contained within an opposition. And the opposition here is Mars to Uranus. And it's technically 2 degrees beyond the bowl, but I would count it as a bowl anyhow. And that Mars in Uranus opposition is another Uranian person who, in relationship, kind of brings out that crazy stuff or either suppresses her own crazy stuff so that there's an association with, you know, artists and eclectics and intelligent people that maybe I'm not that artistic. I'm not saying this is you, but it's like, I'm not that artistic. I don't have the courage to live on that far on the edge. So I'll associate with people who do. Is that
My husband. Yes, that fits the bill.
all right? And often in astrology, when two planets are opposite each other, it in some way reflects to a tug of war from the inside to the outside. And in a way, it's because it's hard to hold both of those in one. What we do is we act one and give the other to the other person. But Mars likes being in Capricorn. If you were born just a day or two later, that Mars would have been in Aquarius. And Mars is said to be exalted in Capricorn. It's not its home sign. It's like if you're a king and you're in your own palace, that's great. But sometimes it's better to be in the palace of someone else where you're the hero, because you're treated even better. And Mars in Capricorn is that because it finishes what it starts. Mars at home in Aries can start anything, but in Capricorn, there's that sense of seeing things through to the end. That Mars in Capricorn near Chiron, the teacher, wounded healer, is opposite an expansive part of your chart, the Uranus and Jupiter in Cancer. And that's the part that in some ways opens up vistas, opens up new ideas, and in some ways maybe does that internally or emotionally or home and family. There's something that's different about how that growth path brings opportunity to you. And the intriguing thing here is that tug of war is square exactly or very close to a lineup of the Sun and Neptune, which is the part of you that is confused. Now, when I say the word confused, I don't necessarily just mean a bad thing of like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. No, confusion technically means without boundary, because when two things melt together, that means they are fused together. And so confusion is really a result of the ego freaking out because the boundary between me and you has disappeared. That's why we get confused in love, because love disintegrates the illusion of separateness. And so with someone born with the sun lined up with Neptune, it's like, what boundary? You know, and so again, the dreams, the fantasies, the illusions, the spirituality is important, but in your chart, that piece of being the Libran that you are, the artist, the counselor, the go-between, the make it nice with your dreams, your fantasies, your illusions, your spirituality, has a really hard time with the real world of what you have to start and finish, because that's the square to the opposition. Can you see what I'm talking about here? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Everything with it, because everything's, we got, what, 8 planets in the last
Yeah.
5 degrees.
Now, the thing though, that's one of the saving graces is Venus at the very last degree of Scorpio is 1/6 of a circle to the Mars Capricorn side of it, and 1/3 of a circle to the Uranus Jupiter side of it. This point that is harmonically balanced to both sides of that tug of war is the release point. And that gives you a way out of the conflict of the dilemma. And the way out has to do with Venus, with love, with somehow rising above whatever the material world conflict is and going to that place, Venus in your chart, even though it still can struggle a bit because it's square to the Pluto moon. Oh, let's talk about the Pluto moon for a moment, because that's a technical word, badass position, because it makes me immediately realize that even though Gemini rising, I have Gemini rising also. Gemini rising is it's the sign that can maybe with anyone. You know what that is? Oh yeah, I can maybe with that person. It's not it's just interacting. Gemini rising is clever. It's Gemini is duality. And there's an old fire sign theater line that says, how can you be two places at once when you're nowhere at all? Geminis move around really well, really fast. And the thing though is that you're not a Gemini. It's just the way you interact with the outer world. People can like you because you're so easy to communicate with, or there's that, but you're keeping to yourself the Venus and Scorpio that basically when you play marbles on the playground, you're playing for keeps. Everyone else thinks they're playing for fun. And the Pluto Moon conjunction, when you feel something, you can put words to it, but everyone knows that when you feel something, you're not playing the same chess game as everyone else. You're really playing again for keeps, for purpose. And there's that sense of it's almost like as a kid, you could have been so intense sometimes that people that you liked seem to just go away suddenly. It's as if you're playing and all of a sudden your friends go, I didn't realize it was so late, I gotta go. And what just happened? And you learn early on that if you don't get so deep and so intense and so passionate, that if you stay in that Gemini rising, that way they don't have to be offended. They can feel that lighthearted energy from you. And so the Gemini rising in some way becomes a way in which you move in the outer world without having to have everyone have to engage who you are. And all I can say is that I would much rather have you as a friend than as an enemy. Now, not that you necessarily have or make enemies, but if someone pushes a boundary, Mars in Capricorn that will finish what someone else starts, and or that Pluto Moon conjunction, if someone else messes with a boundary, either yours, a loved one, a family member, a child, they'll wish they didn't. Yeah, I mean, because all of a sudden you're not in control, something else is. Does that make sense to you? Oh, yeah. Yeah, and actually, it's not just Mercury in Scorpio. Thank you for that. It's Mercury conjoined with Saturn in Scorpio, which basically says that when Christine says something, there used to be that commercial, and I haven't watched TV in decades, but it was some financial consulting thing, Dreyfus. When so-and-so speaks, everyone listens. Christine can be lighthearted and whatever, but when she shifts gears to say something that's important, everyone knows that she's gone somewhere else and they need to listen, and that it's no bullshit. They need to deal with it. Is that true on some level?
Yeah, I was thinking more of the
You get to say that about you. I don't, unless it's a second date and your husband approves. Yeah. So that's some of what I see. And again, the Moon Pluto has been impacted over this past week, or actually going back a couple of weeks ago, by Venus going across there and now retrograding over that even now. And it's easing off a little bit, but it'll hit it the third and final time, later on in October. So that's pretty potent, I would imagine. And certainly the other thing that I think is very potent is the fact that Pluto in the sky now, which is at 29 degrees of Capricorn, is lined up with your Mars, and therefore has been over the last year or so messing with both your Mars and with your Jupiter, Uranus, and even going back a few years, prior, 2 or 3 years, squaring your Sun. And yet it's been working out fine with your Venus, whether that's your relationship, love in your life, or whether it's financial stuff. But this has been a very intense period of time, and it ain't over yet. I mean, there's a real level of having to deal with the intensity and power of Plutonic transformation. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, my father passed last year. Now his mom passed.
Yeah.
So and I know they say, oh, Pluto is always dead.
No, but and when they say it's not death, it's also not your death. The people who die don't have a problem with it. It's those of us who are left here dealing with the wake. And I say the wake as a double entendre, it's which always reminds me of the book Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, which actually came from an old Irish drinking song about the death of this guy named Finn. And in an Irish wake, everyone's drinking whiskey, and one of them starts pouring whiskey on dead Finn, and he comes alive. Then it's Finnegan's Awake again. And that's where the book Finnegan's Wake gets its title from. James Joyce had one too many somethings. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's enough. Are you okay? We have some sense of completion. Good. And with that, anybody have any comments, feedback, questions? We're a small enough group. Come on, just no. Is anyone still awake? I'm sorry, Shelley.
I have a question about Scorpio. Likes to in special with the Saturn block that.
Well,
I do like it.
and Shelley, I would suggest two things here. First of all, that Mercury is retrograde, and I'm not sure whether or not we're going to go quickly to an animation of that chart so that I can see by moving this forward a few days. I want to see whether Mercury at 14 degrees of Scorpio, whether it's retrograde and whether it actually, so it retrogrades back into the conjunction with Saturn, and Saturn could be a block, but it also could be a sense of authority. It could be a sense of this is what's real. And if you couple that with, if you couple that with, let me go back to the chart itself. If you couple that with the modern ruler of Scorpio being Pluto in its alignment with the moon, I see the Gemini rising as a wordy person, making that Mercury retrograde even stronger, more powerful. I don't know what kind of work you did or what you do, but it seems like there should, that whole sense of the depth and power, whether it's psychologically oriented or the Venus related artistically oriented, somehow it's Mercury and Mercury Saturn that gives you that sense of authority and following through. What did you have a profession or? What? Everything. Nuclear physicist. Astronaut. I'm sorry, go ahead. Which is very Plutonic and Scorpionic because it sees things that are hidden. Which also is Plutonic because of the transformational aspect, not just the deep. And we didn't mention, or I mentioned, but I never dove into it, the fact that your Mars in Capricorn is conjunct Chiron, and that Chiron is part of that whole opposition thing, square Neptune, which I imagine as a healer or massage practitioner therapist, that there was that whole level of intuition and sensitivity that allowed people to go through transformational experiences, whether or not even if you knew what you were doing, sometimes you didn't have to know why you were doing it. You just knew that that's what you needed to do. I don't know if that makes sense.
I didn't do that very well.
What
I
else?
worked in a metaphysical bookstore.
Okay.
That was one of my favorites.
Well, and again, here the Mercury Scorpio is the authority of going deep, coupled with that, moon in Pluto. So, and the whole spirituality thing associated with that, with the sun, Neptune. Someone said something, I didn't catch that. Oh,
I'm always.
there you go. All right. Well, with that,
But I wanted to
go ahead,
say one thing.
please.
I've hit my chart with many times, but nobody's ever pointed out that Venus.
Yeah, actually, it's a thing of mine. I pick up on weird things. And there's a couple of people in my apprentice program that this is going to sound like Rick saying the same old thing again. But in astrology, we all know that if two planets or more are in opposition, like the Mars Chiron opposing the Jupiter Uranus, if they're squared by another planet, or in Christine's case, a pair of them, the Sun and Neptune, that is a particular configuration called a T-square, where you have 3 out of 4 points on this cosmic grand square. That's something we know. However, when a planet is at a point which is 1/3 of a circle to one side and 1/6 of a circle to the other, and there are 4 of those points, whether there's a planet there or not. There's one on this side, sextile Mars, one on this side, sextile the Cancer planets, and then the pair on the other side also. Those points are called the points of Thales, Thales. And Thales was a Greek mathematician, philosopher, who came up with the theorem that whenever you inscribe a semicircle inside, I don't want to say this, whenever you inscribe 2 planets within a semicircle, the angle is always 90 degrees. In other words, mathematically, the angle that Venus makes with Mars and Uranus, that angle between those 2 lines is 90 degrees. That could be anywhere on that half the circle. And the point of Thales, though, in particular, is the point that harmonizes with both ends of the opposition, point of Thales. And there's another point which I've identified and labeled and named, because I have this geeky thing of naming things. And that is, there's an aspect pattern in astrology when 2 planets are 90 degrees to one another, and they're both 135 degrees, or 90 plus a half of a 90. That's a square and a half to the point opposite it. And that's called Thor's hammer. I didn't make that name up. That's just a configuration that if you're an astrology student or geek, you could Google and it would come back what it is, how it works. But I've identified that when, just like this point at the Sun and Venus is 90 degrees to both ends of this opposition, just like Venus is a sextile and trine to both points in that opposition. In fact, even Pluto is, and this angle here, those green lines, that's still 90 degrees, but Pluto is a semi-sextile, 30 degrees to the Cancer side, and a quincunx, that's 5/12 of a circle, to the other side. And if this is too much for you, just let it roll through and out, no big deal. But there's a point that here would be a half a square, 45 degrees to one side, and a square and a half to the other side. And there are 4 of those points. And I call those the points of Thor. And when you see those, and we're not even looking at that level of aspect here, we're just keeping it simple for tonight. But when you see them, and they're immediately, that planet is the agitating planet of the opposition. And it, in my experience, it always tells a story. So but that's the Venus point. So thank you for bringing that up. And by the way, if you're totally geeky, I do chart interpretation webinars once a month. And if you go to my Patreon page, is Patreon, patreon.com/Rick Levine. And there's a whole bunch of levels. Many of you, I know, get my monthly on the first of the month. For $3 a month, you get a mid-month update. At $10 a month, you get a bunch of other stuff, but just additional bits and pieces. For $35 a month, and you can join 1 month, or have people who have been in that level for 5 years, and other people come and go as they will. No pressure, no commitment. My kind of deal. Kidding. But at $35 a month, you get an invitation once a month to come to a class where I do a deep dive on 2 charts, about an hour long on each chart, with one person in the group on video with me. I'm doing their chart and teaching why I'm saying what I'm saying. And the person, like tonight, is responding, but we typically don't let them off as easily as I've let you guys off, because it's just not appropriate. But that's called a chart web level. It's a chart webinar, and that's every month, $35 a month. And then there's another program for people who are more serious, they get all those other things I just talked about. Plus, we have 2 to 4 other meetings a month. And on all of these, if you miss the meeting or if you miss the monthly, in fact, if you sign up for the monthly, you immediately get all 5 years that I've been doing this. So it keep you off the streets at night for a long time. But at the apprentice level, the $100 a month level, we meet in small groups and then in a large group throughout the month and delve much deeper into topics. So if you're geeky enough in this teaching, any of this excites you, you do have a way to go deeper. Because someone asked me, where can I learn more? And I do have a lot of stuff like plastered around the web in strange places. I've been doing a weekly or bi-weekly discussion with the owner of the Astrology Hub, Amanda Pua-Walsh, and we've touched on topics like reincarnation and what's the most misunderstood thing about every sign, and how do you deal with complicated transits, and does astrology really work, and what do I do with my religious friends? And I mean, there all kinds of topics, and there's about 60 or 70 of those online, and those you don't need to join anything. You can just, they're on YouTube, you can just find them. So a lot of my stuff is accessible. But thank you for that question, and thank you guys for sticking in the long haul. And I think we should call it quits and let these poor overtime baristas go home. Thank you guys so much. And without panicking, this is not a fire drill. It would be good to be able to let them get finished with what they need to be finished with. And by the way, the India retreat things, India is filling up. There'll be about 45 people in the program. It's a 10-day program in the south of Goa, a very magical and easy part of India. But there's still a handful of slots left, but they're going. So if you're interested, that's something you may want to explore. Thank you all very much. And with that, we're going to draw the YouTube live to an end. And for all of you people, thank you. And I'll talk to you guys in a minute. And that's it. Thank you.